The Sahel is in crisis.
The bandits' attack left us with nothing. Our properties, including farm plantation and livestock, our women and children were stripped naked, left with no clothes.
This is In the Sahel. Hello and welcome to this edition of In the Sahel, coming to you from West Africa Democracy Radio, 94.9 FM, Dakar, Senegal. In the Sahel is WADR's weekly security magazine that delves into the heart of the African security crisis, telling stories and strategies to shape the region's response to pressing challenges. The program is brought to you with support from the Open Society Foundation, OSF. I am Imo Edet, standing in for Abdullahi Hassan, who is away on vacation. Well, last week was a debate edition of the program, which featured experts to discuss the effectiveness and setbacks of taxation. And this edition, we are looking at military equipment and financing the fight against terrorism. This is In the Sahel. The threat of terrorism is complex, multifaceted, and evolving. Many factors play a role in exacerbating the nature of this threat, yet one in particular is central to the very modus operandi of terrorism and indeed of critical importance to the international community's response to prevent and combat it, namely the acquisition of weapons by terrorists. Having said this, states in the Sahel region have been facing a tough time in fighting these terrorists, following the short flow of funds for this purpose. This has over the years eaten into budgets of the various countries that are particularly facing the threat of insurgency, making financing the fight against terrorism an Herculean task. Before we continue, let's pause for a report from Augustine Colley.
In recent years, the West African sub-region has been faced with a wave of terrorism resulting in the death of hundreds of people, destruction of public and private properties, and the displacement of millions. In response, states and multilateral institutions within and outside the sub-region have developed and introduced different mechanisms to address the issue. But this has been a daunting task, following a short in the financing of these plans and mechanisms meant to eradicate terrorism. The sub-regional bloc ECOWAS estimates that it needs up to $2.6 billion annually to establish a 5,000-strong security force to combat terrorism, according to one of the options being considered by defense officials at a recent meeting. However, the size of a potential force and how much will be required to fund it has been the headache of defense and finance ministers from the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. Here is a former ECOWAS commissioner, General Francis Behansin, speaking recently in an interview on combating terrorism in the Sahel, says, partners and international players have thus far failed to stem the tide of terrorism, breeding disappointment among local populations and military forces.
I cannot tell you how many strategies are being developing in the Sahel, and especially in Mali. There are more than 20 strategies. And as you said, there is no coordination, no political coordination, no strategical coordination, no military operation coordinating. And the things are worsening every day. You know that MINUSMA was there for about 10 years without good results. They've done many things. There are about 13,000 soldiers from international countries coming in Mali. They developed many actions for human beings, for health, but no combating the terrorism. And the international community who sent there, as I can say, USA, France, Japan, China, Russia, many countries of West Africa and Africa in general, they don't arrive to stop the terrorism.
More worrying and setting back funding for the fight against terrorism was the exit of Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali from ECOWAS. Accordingly, for the regional force such as that of ECOWAS, two options were proposed. One will cost $2.6 billion annually for a brigade of 5,000 and another that will cost $481 million for 1,500 troops. Here is Nigeria's Chief of Defense Staff, General Christopher Musa.
The complexity of the security landscape demands that we leverage our collective expertise, share intelligence, and coordinate our efforts across borders if we must solve these challenges. Thus, collaboration is paramount and imperative to address both the root causes and symptoms of insecurity in our region.
For his part, ECOWAS Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security, Abdel Fattah Musa said, members on a suspension will not be excluded from the regional force and each member state will be accepted to contribute a quota.
The exit of this country from ECOWAS after almost 5 decades of diplomatic, political and security cooperation will eventually generate unintended consequences. This 42nd meeting was inevitably delayed as a result of the acute political development that occurred in the region, including the cascading coups and the announced withdrawal of the alliance of the Sahelian states from our community. These developments required extraordinary political interventions.
Before the year 2020, countries in the sub-region have been enjoying huge security funding from international partners until soldiers in the 3 countries carried out coups, blaming civilian leaders for allowing Islamist militants to gain ground. Once in power, juntas have torn up defense agreements with the US, French, and UN forces and invited Russians to take their place.
That was a report by Augustine Coley. If you're just tuning in, this is In the Sahel, WADR's security program aiming to tell the African security crisis the African way.
This is In the Sahel.
The focus of today's package is on military equipment and financing the fight against terrorism. Well, let's get deeper into the conversation as we bring on board our guest, Dr. Oluwole Ojewale. He is the ENACT Program's Regional Organized Crime Observatory Coordinator for Central Africa at the Institute for Security Studies in Dakar. Dr. Ojewale, thank you so much for your time and welcome to the program. Let me start with you giving us an overview of efforts by states in the sub-region in the fight to end terrorism. Has there been any progress so far?
Well, I think to a large extent we can say it's almost looking like 2 steps forward and 1 step backward. If you look at the fact that the Sahel part of West Africa, particularly the Central Sahel state of Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger, have become the terrorism capital of the world, according to Global Terrorism Database in their 2024 report. It also goes in line with other conflict or political violence database like ACLED, in which I'm trying to say we have seen increase in attacks in the past 1 year or so. And the implication of that is that no matter how much is spent, we can almost deduce that there's no value for money in terms of public safety and security in those places where attacks are going on a regular basis. So in spite of the rhetorics and the campaign and the popular conversation that you hear from government from time to time, which is always about we are doing something about it, and so has voted certain amount of money to combat insecurity, insurgency, and all those things. I think those campaigns, whether they are media or official data, are not speaking to the realities in terms of the actual experience of the people in terms of public safety and security. So they claim that there are efforts, but I don't think there's a justifiable result on ground. And the second thing is to also look at the security arrangement that is now going on in the West Africa now,
Okay.
in which we are seeing the deconstructing of the old security governance of the Western support in Central Sahel, giving way to Russia, African core, supporting some of these countries. That also has created a gap in which the state security forces are not able um, to step into the vacuum that is created as a result of the exit of this multinational partnership. And then the direct result is that the violent extremist group, terrorist bandits, are taking over in those territories. So I'm saying this to illustrate the fact that, yes, funding has always been through local national efforts
Yeah.
combined with global support from partners who provide what they call military aid. I mean, security aid
Yeah.
or military aid in certain instances. So if you decouple that, like we have seen in the Central Sahel, and then the one that you are looking up to is also prosecuting a war in Ukraine that is going into 3 years now, and is not able to provide them the necessary support that they want to see. The implication is that there's no value for money at both ends. So across the length and breadth of West Africa, I think data on incidents of attacks have been on the rise, and in spite of what the government is saying, in which we have to also acknowledge the fact that some of them are trying, but I think the effort is not yielding justifiable result, which also means that we probably need to, do more at the preventive level rather than focusing more on the kinetic operation, which is always the all this campaign about decimating terrorists is all about.
Well, Dr. Wale, you mentioned something, the de-aligning of with Western forces. Has this brought down that effort? I mean, if you compare when we had this alignment with the Western forces, the likes of France, Western forces that were really supporting this fight against terrorism, has there been a retrogression after the de-alignment?
Obviously, there's a retrogression going by the data. You decouple the G5 Sahel. Also, say you are no longer part of ECOWAS. These three countries.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they told the US to wind down on their drone base in Niger. So those are just the major ones. There are also partnership support in terms of military support from European Union, from UK government, from France. Okay, I've mentioned the G5
Yes.
Sahel.
Yes.
I know a whole lot of other packages that have been providing some form of support in this regard. And if attacks have been on the rise, it just goes to show that definitely the stopgap has been the security arrangements. They might have not yielded the necessary result. And I'm not holding brief for those establishments, the Western establishment. But the truth of the matter is that if this thing has now assumed geometric progression in terms of incident,
Yeah.
it shows that these three states, probably they were just acting on emotion and not really, they didn't even think through the issues. Because if you are decoupling those security architecture, the next question that one will expect is that they must have alternative arrangement
Exactly.
to be able to
Exactly.
feed that vacuum in the first place. And then they are gravitating towards Russia, claiming that they are looking for security partnership, but the overarching objective is regime protection, in which the lives of the people who are in danger in the countryside, where these terrorist groups are reigning supreme. So if you jettison one option, I think there should be some other credible alternative option. And then they are looking towards Russia, in which even Putin himself is looking at, scavenging for arms in Iran, North Korea, and all these places. So it's a whole lot of challenges. I know that there are also some form of partnership from Turkey, but these are fringe partnerships
Yeah.
that cannot compare in any way with the deconstructed Western security partnership that was existing in the Sahel before the coup.
Dr. Wale, what makes it very difficult for countries, for instance, let's take Nigeria, with a strong, strong military base. Acquisition of military equipment has always been an issue for countries like Nigeria, which, if you compare the level of the military strength now to how it was then, one will baffle. Over the years, why the retrogression, even in acquisition of military equipment, and you realize that these insurgents that you're fighting with even have more sophisticated equipment than you. Why is that the case?
Okay, so I think we can put this squarely on leadership. You mentioned Nigeria.
Yeah.
16 years after independence, what is the state of military-industrial complex in the country in terms of local production of ammunition and weapons? The idea is in a very sorry state now, because 60 years after independence, there must be some form of industrial development that has taken place. And don't forget that across the world, major industrial development leap were also as a result of military innovation. The World War that took place in Germany after the World War gave birth to the rise of these automobiles of BM, Mercedes-Benz, and all these things. And then, so Nigeria fought a civil war. And then the eastern flank was able to innovate and develop, local weapons that they used to fight the wars. But a sorry case is that everything was just, both the baby and the water were just thrown away after the civil. Because in the face of adversity, ingenuity comes alive from people, and they are able to develop skills, innovations, technology for survival. So I think Nigeria also had a similar advantage that was not really capitalized upon after that civil war. But be that as it may, we can leave that. The big picture is that generally the industrial leap that the country has made is not commendable. And if the country hasn't made such remarkable step in terms of achievement for industrial gain, industrial development, there is nothing that we can expect from the military. So you now have a country that have to depend on everything, including cartridges, bullets from this Western establishment. For crying out loud, Brazil is manufacturing arms. And so, a whole lot of other countries that you can consider as the middle power nations, even in South Africa. So I don't see any reason why Nigeria shouldn't have made that leap over the years to also be able to manufacture sufficient ammunition that can cater for this shortfall, that make them to be overtly dependent on the industrial nations that have made that military advancement almost over a century ago. That's the number one. The second factor is the issue of human rights abuses. There is a lot of stringent clearance that countries have to adhere to before those arms can be procured particularly from the West. The consideration might be a bit lenient if you are patronizing Russia or China, but for the Western establishment, the conditions are stringent. And most of the times, these weapons, particularly when you are talking about the sophisticated advanced one, whether it is Super Tucano, they are not stuff that you buy on the shelf, because as most of the times they have to be context fitted. In places where you are going to use it. So that is the reason why the procurement takes process. But the armed groups, the terrorist groups, they don't wait until you get your weapons. They continue to wreak havoc on a daily basis. So I think if the industrial leap have been made over the years, perhaps countries like Nigeria will not find themselves in this very tough quandary in which they have to overtly develop. Depend on these advanced countries to be able to make informed security decisions that is going to guide their operations and logistics. It is practically depending on this country, and that's the reason why Nigeria at some point have to turn in the direction of Russia. I think around 2014, 2015, when America insisted they were not going to sell certain weapons to them on the basis of human rights abuses. And it also coincided with the time that the Amnesty published a report on stars on their soldiers, blood in their hand. Issues about human rights infractions. That clearance have to be made before countries can really get these supply. And the third factor is the fact that biting economic conditions at home also implies that the limited resources have to be shared in different directions, education, infrastructure,
Yes.
and all those things. So, coupled with the fact that the security development in the country is overstretched now, in the sense that there's banditry, there's terrorism, there's separatist struggle, and the regular everyday crime of kidnapping and all these things, which the state security forces have to battle with. And they can't do that with cutlasses and hoe. In most cases, they have to do it with sophisticated weapons because the armed groups are also sophisticated. So these are critical challenges that hamper or affect or limit armament procurement.
Yeah.
So you can't scrape somebody's head in his absence if the same people are pulling away from they are pulling away from the union. So you can't put $2.5 billion to go and pursue such
Such tax is a huge amount. I mean, if you want to look, like you talked about the biggest, the biggest spender, say Nigeria now. Don't you think even if we have Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, can't we make up this amount?
It's about priority. $2.5 billion is a big amount of money now. Which don't forget that each of these countries also have their internal priority.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they need Mali, Burkina Faso to be able to put the resources together. And for me, I think even if these people are not cooperating, there is a need to put a robust security architecture around the borderline of Ghana, Burkina Faso, Senegal, Mali, Nigeria, Niger. This is a vast expanse of land. For Nigeria, it's about 1,500 kilometers with Niger. Why am I saying that? You need resources to ensure that what is happening in those places is not percolating into your country in terms of arms trafficking, spread of terrorism, so that the country doesn't become a safe haven for people that are probably arching these ideas and they are being displaced from Niger or whatever. Look at what the Torah state of Togo, Benin have done to in the recent time in terms of the attacks by terrorist groups. So even if you can't go in to maybe combat insurgency in the central Sahel state, I'm saying they still need to go ahead to finance operation, cross-border operation that prevent the spread of terrorism into this coastal state.
Well, Dr. Wale, as we round up this conversation, what ways would you suggest for countries in the Sahel to manage their funding in their fight against insurgency?
Well, I know Burkina Faso is doing something in which the voluntary contribution, like a security governance tax or something. You can't finance security with piecemeal inflow. You need heavy duty inflow to really finance security. So I think for me, my basic suggestion would be that these guys should come back to ECOWAS. Let us put up a comprehensive resource plan together to combat these security challenges and not pursue an isolationist agenda just for the narrow ambition to keep themselves in power. For me, the part to go is the part of cooperation, and people must put their money where their mouth is. Let them fund these kind of standby force, and let the government spend more on preventive efforts, address the issues of poverty, address the issues of grievances in local communities, and then you will be able to turn make a new turn the tide. So I think that is the way to go. Me, I'm a big supporter and an advocate that the ECOWAS and every stakeholder should prioritize the reintegration of Niger and Mali and Burkina Faso back into ECOWAS, one. And the second thing is that the military junta, too, in those countries should not resist help. In fact, I think they need it more than any other person. I remember when the flood incidents happened, I think it's in Mali, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe Burkina Faso or Niger. One of them cried for international help. It's not only in such emergency that you should cry out for international help. Even in security issues, they need to embrace external support. And I'm not saying this to belittle the concerns of people in those countries in terms of how international support have served their interests over the years. I think that can be a better way of going about it, maintaining a posture and a negotiation that confers advantage on their people. and not that they are being taken advantage of or exploited by external forces. There's no altruism in international relations. You get what you bargain for, and if you come from the position of weakness, you also get you don't make anything out of such a arrangement. So I think that is the paradigm shift that we need in the region.
Dr. Wale, thank you so much for your insight and for your time.
Thank you so much, my brother.
That was Dr. Wale Ojawale. He is the ENACT Program's Regional Organized Crime Observatory Coordinator for Central Africa at the Institute for Security Studies in Dakar. This is a wrap, and that's it on this episode of In the Sahel, WADR security program which focus on military equipment and financing the fight against terrorism. As a reminder, this program is brought to you with support from the Open Society Foundation, OSF. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to my guests and colleagues for their contributions. Do join us on WADR 94.9 FM every Friday at 7:30 a.m. and the same day at 6:30 p.m. for the repeat broadcast. Also, do join our conversation on all of our social media platforms, X, Instagram at WADR News. Do visit WADR.org for this and previous editions of the program. I am Imo Edit. Bye for now.